Good morning, everybody, and hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Justin Bronk. I'm the Research Fellow for Air Power at RUSI, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session on the Air Mobility Force experience of the evacuation during Operation Pitting in Afghanistan. We'll shortly be joined by three wonderful speakers from RAF Bryce Norton, who are speaking to us together. In deference to old tradition, after all, RUSI is a stuffy organisation, we may go in rank order, but essentially the programme will be that each of the three speakers will give 5 to 10 minutes on their personal experience during the evacuation, and then we'll move to Q&A, which I will moderate and select questions on. Just as a sort of quick housekeeping note before we introduce the speakers and then move to them. This is about the Air Mobility Force experience of op pitting. There's a huge amount of wonderful experience that you're about to hear and that you should ask questions on and talk back and forth on. However, just to warn you all, I will be filtering out questions that go beyond what they're able to talk about. So things like UK past experience in Afghanistan, current situation, overseas, other US or other partner operations, Taliban legitimacy, all that kind of stuff. So please, do keep questions specific to, the RAF experience of pitting, the Air Mobility Force lessons learned, etc. Because otherwise I won't call them. And without further ado, we'll move on to the speakers. So the bios should be available online, but as a brief thing, our first speaker will be Wing Commander Calvin Bailey. He's the officer commanding 70 Squadron and was during the operation as well. So commander of the deployed air mobility forces there. He's got experience flying mainly C-130 in Afghanistan, Iraq, on detachment with US Special Operations Command. And he was also commanding officer in his previous role of 903 Expeditionary Air Wing. After the wing commander has spoken, we'll move to Flight Lieutenant Kate Pomeroy. She has been in the RAF since 2006 and was the aeromedical nurse team leader during op pitting. She's also got 2 tours of experience in Afghanistan, as well as multiple other operations. And then our third speaker is Corporal Hayley Court, who after a 22-year full career as a regular, is now 10 years into her reservist career as well, and is apparently volunteered for pretty much every operation she possibly could have done. So no surprise to she was on op pitting as well. And indeed, Hayley was also awarded the Diamond Light Source Oxfordshire Best Reservist Award for this year. So we're very, very lucky to have the three of them here. And without further ado, I will pass over to Wing Commander Bailey to begin with his remarks.
Hello, good morning. I'll just take a nod, Justin, to say that you can hear us, okay?
Yep, can hear you fine.
Brilliant, marvellous. Well, good morning and welcome to RAF Bryce Norton, virtually, of course. It's a lovely summer's day here. We're staring out at bright blue skies over Bryce Norton and many aircraft bouncing around the circuit. To my, in fact, we'll just do some introductions first. So my name is Wing Commander Calvin Bailey. I was officer commanding 70 Squadron, and I was the detachment commander in charge of the deployed forces in Minhad. To my right.
Hello, I'm Flight Lieutenant Kate Pomeroy. I'm an aeromed nurse, and I made up one of the 8 teams that we had in Minhad, moving the Afghanistans back from Kabul.
And my left.
Hi, my name is Corporal Hayley Court. I am a ground steward from 602 Squadron. I was part of the route from Minhad to Bryce Norton.
So we'll talk this morning loosely about our experiences during op pitting. And I'm going to start by talking thematically about a couple of things that I think people might wish to delve into, and then we'll allow in questions people to explore detail. Operation Pitting then, or the evacuation for Kabul, as it's probably known by most normal human beings, was a non-combat evacuation of UK entitled personnel, Afghani people, and other third nations that the UK chose or was able to support. The operation itself started really probably 6 to 9 months ago with a subordinate operation, which was codenamed Operation Catlow, which was a planned and staged phased withdrawal from Afghanistan of UK fighting forces, and that had been long set and established, and there was a routine and managed drawdown of those forces that the Air Mobility Force had been engaged with. The reason why it's important to mention that is that there was a clear transition from routine operations into ultimately what became an emergency situation. But it's important that we recognise the degree of familiarity with the environment, the people, and the operating methods that the crews and personnel had ahead of the deployment. Op-hitting then was not not to say planned, it was a planned, it was very well planned, detailed and scripted event. It was just something that didn't happen at a moment of our choosing. And so the first lesson that I would draw from op-hitting and from operations similar is the importance of readiness and preparedness for such operations, and the conflict that this has with routine tasking. Now, I raised Op-Catalogue because and the routine nature of the activities into and out of Kabul, because the corollary of any readiness arguments is that the taxpayer wants its money from us, and it expects us to be able to support routine activity and operations. And of course, that is very necessary. But to be able to turn your hand to difficult and dangerous tasks, you need to be able to set and train your forces in isolation. The high efficiency model that we have kind of learned to balance with a readiness model proved successful at pitting, and I think it's one that we need to capture, because being in garrison and flying circuits or training to the high technical capabilities has to be balanced with your ability to know and understand the environment. And I think Catalogue allowed us to create a whole load of risk mitigation models, including crew training, an understanding of how we would deal with a regressing environment. So ahead of going there, we had looked at how we would deal with different levels of airfield assurance, including loss of the main taxiway, and loss of the air traffic services. But I think that's something that we could probably do a better job of corporately recognising and putting up front as capabilities that we can offer into the humanitarian and contingency space. So, for example, reopening an airfield is something that our US partners did, and that's something that we can do, and something that was considered during op-hitting, but it's probably something that we've not committed ourselves to in terms of a whole force, because as you'll see and hear, the force is not just about the operating aircrew, it's about all the subordinate and joint elements that sit alongside us, that are part of the aircrew, so to speak, and the force elements that are capable of actually extracting someone or people and material from forward-based locations. So that's something that we may wish to touch on, the importance of readiness and the challenges of having large standing armies and air forces that appear to be underutilized. The second thing, or second area that I would, that pitting highlights for us is the appropriateness of technology. All of our air mobility platforms and assets, and that's people and medical capability and force protection capability, the regiment, the police, all of our capabilities were employed during Operation Pitting. But at the front of house, the big expensive items, the aeroplanes, we saw actually our oldest platform in terms of technology, which is the C-17, showing its unquestionable utility. To be able to lift out the load sizes that we took from Kabul definitely underwrote the successfulness of the operation. And as much as I'd like to tell you just how brilliant the A400M and the C-130 are, the C-17 was almost irreplaceable. And whilst there are newer and more novel platforms, on some occasions, size is the most important attribute that a capability may progress, regardless of how new that technology is. However, there is also a balance to play with numbers. And we saw that having a large number of platforms and being able to create many amounts of or a greater number of contact points, and that be with our medics, our RAF regiment personnel, or with the platforms, the aircraft platforms themselves, means that we also need to consider the numbers of platforms, because part of the reason we were able to work at the rate we were able to was we were able to apply large numbers of contact points to problems, be that with people or with platforms. And so I'm very proud to say that with the Atlas and the C-130, we were able to apply those platforms to problems that occurred more frequently, and that would allow the during the operation, but in smaller numbers, and that allowed the C-17 to concentrate on the large volumetrics, the humping and dumping of large amount of people in particular, but also later material. And I would just ask that maybe a discussion be that, you know, have we got our mix correct? I would argue that we probably have. And what does that look like in the future? The last and probably most important thing I will point to is the importance of people. The US call it one of the soft truths. You can't just go and magic up capability by sprinkling special forces dust over people, and you can't do that with Air Force dust either, and be able to manage up the brilliant people that are sat either side of me, because it takes, as I said, a large amount of investment in time to be able to develop the people that we had forward on Operation Pitting. It's important that we understand, I think, the leadership models that were used throughout the operation, and the decisions that he made at his level. Hello, we're back, I believe.
Sorry, I'm afraid I think we lost you for about the last sort of 30 seconds that you were talking. It's about 30 seconds.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'll just finish up. You've missed some very important and special, powerful words there. So the importance of the decisions that he made, and I would ask if we look back at sort of our air mobility operations, where our leaders are, and I mean in books. Now, I was very privileged to serve with the 1st Special Operations Wing, and I can talk about the likes of Hap Arnold and Cochrane and Allison, the commanders that enabled the UK Chindit forces to act so brilliantly in Burma. I'm not sure, whilst I can talk about the tactical air forces and from the Royal Air Force, I'm not sure that I could talk as comfortably about Baldwin and the likes, who were our commanders there, but also how they engaged and interacted with the other parts of the Air Force enterprise that allowed us to draw in, and they speak, there's some very good examples in Slim's writing, of how we brought in aeromedical teams with the L1 aircraft, and how that was routinely overloaded, extracting people from the airfield, but also the more routine air mobility side of things with the use, innovative use then of the C-47. And I would ask that we, as a close, that we consider some of the examples that were seen on op pitting, and make an assessment of whether they are leadership models that we need to study in the future. So with that, Justin, I think that's me. I've rambled on for long enough.
Thanks very much. I think in that case, we'll move on to Kate, if that's okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to discuss slightly what I did in my role on op pitting. So I'm a nurse. I'm based at the Tactical Medical Wing here at Bryce Norton, and we are involved in aeromedical evacuation of patients from all around the world. And how op pitting started for us is we had small teams tasked to go out to Minad and be augmented with every flight to provide medical cover. We started off with 6 teams. In a team, we'd have a nurse and a medic or a paramedic. This quickly escalated and we went up to 8 teams in order to be on every flight that we could do, be it coming out of Kabul. On those flights, we would provide the medical cover for all personnel on that flight and the Afghanistan's on there. These flights were busy flights. We would move from anywhere between 100 up to 400 packs. This ranged from a variety of different ages. We had a lot of children on the flights, a lot of pregnant women, and therefore we were there to ensure the safe evacuation of them from Kabul airport to Dubai. The tasks that we carried out were they made us very proud to be able to provide that service and to have such an impact on the evacuation process. And what really stands out for me is the teamwork that everybody showed. So that wasn't just the nurse and the medic, that was everybody on the flights, the air crew, the force protection, the ground, the movers, everyone on the ground, personnel back at TMW. We were having to order kits in on very quick notice, get extra equipment out to theatre. And so it was such a team effort, even to the point of regiment flights at Bryce Norton putting on extra training for us before we went. So absolutely just such a massive team effort. And the things that we saw was just different to what we would normally see in our day-to-day roles. So we knew there would be a lot of children, didn't realise how many children there would be. And quite often, although we didn't get a lot of medical issues, we would get a lot of people that were just exhausted. So we were there providing extra sweets or drinks for them. And we were also there to just make sure that everyone had that safe evacuation. A couple of things that stand out for me was just like the heartwarming experiences that we had. I remember there was a 4-day-old baby. The mother was purely exhausted, and so just for an hour I held the baby just to let her have a rest. So it was just really proud moments like that that made us work as a team and just be really proud to be part of that operation. I think that's it from me, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And Corporal Haley, if you're happy, should we move straight on to you?
Oh, hi, I'm Hayley Court from 62 Squadron. So my role is cabin crew on the Voyager jet. We are there really for the safety of passengers, but also the comfort of passengers. So a few flights I was on, it was totally, took us all out of our comfort zone, really. I mean, in the years I've done Afghanistan and Iraq, but a lot of the other cabin crew were new to the Voyager force, and they'd never seen anything like it. It was a bit of carnage, really. So when we were in the air, there was a lot of medical issues, but they weren't really medical issues. A lot of them were very weak. The children were they were very cold. We've got the heating up, then a lot more bings, you know, on the. It was constant for us. We were. I think one of the things that stood out for me was when we went round and you heard some stories. There was a father there, and he said to me, he said to his daughter, he says, my daughter's very, very clever. He says, she's going to be a doctor, a teacher. And I thought, that's fantastic. You know, they're coming over to UK, you know, and bringing us something, really. Yeah, so a lot of it was a lot of stories, but mostly was the medical issues that we dealt with. But we are highly trained as cabin crew, and we dealt with them as much as we could. Another thing as well was having the babies on board. You know, there was one mother who said, kept shouting at me saying, food for the baby. And it was a little baby. I said, we haven't got that sort of milk, but it wasn't food. It translated to bed. She wanted the bed for the child. So I was like, I was lucky. But yeah, it was a massive eye opener for us, really. But we handled it, and they all got off quite happy. And then when I got back, I arranged for lots of welfare packages, a lot of blankets for the children. So when I went back on board with a lot of things for the kids and that, there was no children. It was all soldiers then coming back. So that was a bit sad for me, really, because I know we'd left something behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you've all kept beautifully to time, so we have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to abuse chair's privilege, as always, by asking the first one myself. But just out of curiosity, what was your sense of the kind of changing changing atmosphere on the ground throughout the sort of time period of the operation, and also potentially what was the kind of perception of the threat level as you know, as you went from the kind of pretty rapid start of the operation through to the kind of last days when obviously everyone was aware that there was a ticking clock and, you know, there would not necessarily everybody was going to get out.
So our sense of the changing situation and the risk that's being faced on the ground is it's a very absolute question, if that's slightly condescending of me to say so. But by that, what I mean is that it's very difficult for folks that weren't actually at a contact point to understand what was being faced by us. So there was a perception right at the beginning that we were dealing with a cat load type operation, a managed, staged, planned drawdown. Now, when you're actually at the coalface, one of the first missions that I flew, on the way into Kabul, there was a moment when we were flying along. I could hear a number of call signs on the radio, but I couldn't see them on any of our situation awareness aids. And about 4 or 5 of these aircraft just popped up, and I had to give them to the other call signs, I had to give them quite prescriptive direction about how we were going to arrive at the airfield as a collective, because the area controller had said to me and to us through SATCOM, I don't have the SA that you have. And so being able to take that back and also the immediate feelings from and experiences from the crews that were going into and out of Kabul allowed us to make immediate judgments on what needed to be changed to make the situation safer or as safe as it could be. At the same time, the understanding of what was going on the ground, probably the most direct method of understanding, and this goes back to something Kate said, came from the medics. So on the flights into Kabul, pretty much all of the air crews had the medics up on board in the third seat and on the flight deck, and we would talk to the medics about what they were meeting and seeing from their medical counterparts on the ground. And it was quite sobering on your 3-hour or so transit into the airfield to learn of the experiences that were happening there. And you would feel the flight deck become more silent and focused as we learned about what they were facing, what they were learning that their counterparts were facing. And that really framed everyone as they arrived in theatre. But that was probably, aside from the sit reps and directions from higher headquarters, that was our that allowed us to have the greatest degree of understanding. And that was why, as Kate said, and I'll hand over to Kate, was why we were able to react quite quickly at the beginning when we had only 6 medical crews, to send a demand signal back immediately to say we might have got this slightly wrong, we need more people here. And we were able to do that very quickly from those interactions.
Yeah, definitely so. And I think just having that the teamwork with the crew, because we'd be out on every flight with you guys, wouldn't we? And being able to talk and understanding what they knew reassured us. At times I remember there'd just been an explosion and we were just about to set off to collect however many more passengers, and actually that night we couldn't actually land, but because of other reasons. But there wasn't a point that we felt we were apprehensive because we weren't sure what we were always going to get when we landed there and how many people, but we knew that we were, as a team, we were really safe to be able to do that. And actually we just knew that we wanted to get as many people out as possible. So I think that's our job, that Aeromed, for myself and my team as nurses and medics, we do that day in, day out. So we just wanted to get in there, get as many people out with each flight and make it safer for them and a safe evacuation.
But it was also, there was quite an important feedback, wasn't there, in that being able to see and understand what we were facing, we were able to say, right, okay, we know the people were amazing and they would go a lot further than perhaps we would necessarily want us to. We were able to rein things back in, which was very important as well, to say, right, look, we know you'd like to go there, because at the beginning we almost had to push to say, right, we need to go further because we were told we need to take a bit more risk. But then very quickly we had to say, right, actually rein it in. That we've got managed. We very quickly became managed, and we knew what we needed to do. You have to adjust the risk in people's own minds and kind of draw people back as well.
Rules out the window anyway. A few rules out the window, because I had one chairman to have one child, and there was 4 in the seat. We had to just put up with it, because at the end of the day we were doing a job and we had to bring as many people out as we could.
Yeah, I think the thing as well, we did so many moves towards the end. It was such a well-oiled process that it worked really well, because we all knew what we're doing. We knew the expectations of the crew and the pilots and the team. We kind of were all singing off the same hymn sheet then, I'd say.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a question from Lieutenant Colonel Thurl from Canada, who's asking whether you could speak to the internal and external coordination required at the tactical level. I'm getting particularly so many movements, so many countries. Presumably there was a lot of that.
So hopefully, I think we missed part of that, but you talk about the internal and external interactions at the tactical level. which is very absent, that I kind of pointed to that right at the beginning with discussions about Burma and air mobility enterprises slightly more widely. Now, I would have to say that we were quite isolated from a lot of that, because a lot of that happened in the joint force space, and those interactions were happening largely on the ground in Kabul. And speaking to the brigadier who was forward, it was interesting to note how fluid they were. One of the poignant remarks that he made was that his headquarters almost produced no staff work, and everything was on human basis, and the power of human interactions and being able to react to things kind of immediately, because the timelines didn't allow for to say that we weren't just ignoring rules or normal channels. You just had to be able to react to things real time. So we could observe those interactions on the aircraft or in our sphere, because you could see known and planned changes of who we were transporting and the nations that we were transporting, and we were getting very deliberate inputs or input signals from our command headquarters saying that this is where we needed to focus some things. These were the people that we would support. The one thing I perhaps reflect on, and I think the question perhaps alludes to this, in some operations past, so when we were in the Philippines, we had a multinational headquarters that we set up for the tactical air forces, and we were very close and alongside our Canadian counterparts and our US counterparts, in fact all of the countries, the nations that took part in that operation. And that closeness allowed us to learn from each other, change and adapt very quickly. Because of the quite specific national approach to this, because we were recovering our own citizens to a degree, and that's not entirely true. I think we recovered 38 different nations, but we weren't able to readily share those lessons, and that is probably quite a useful thing that we should try and do now, and that's at all levels, and how we interact at all parts of the chain, because everything that we do is multinational. So I don't know whether you had that in your areas, whether you had interactions at all. I think we were very isolated from it. Actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it was just seeing the different kind of sharing the way that we worked, is beneficial anyway. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether that answers the.
I think that's very useful. Thank you. Got a question from Liam Obiston. Ospidon. Sorry, I can't pronounce it. That's my mistake. Specifically, I think from Commander Bailey was asking whether there were lessons that you'd identified from the particular operational perspective of having an airfield which was initially insecure and overrun with packs on the operating surface, and being conscious as we all are that with those pretty harrowing videos of people hanging off C-17s. Did that change the way you were subsequently operating the fleet, and what kind of lessons did you draw from that?
So it's interesting that so there are a number of stories and missives that you won't hear. So when the airfield, when that happened, we had some planes in the air that were making approaches to the airfield, and I was in comms with one of our Atlases that was trying to make approaches at the time, and we were working through our comm plans, because like I said, we had planned to go to the main runway and then to the taxiway, and that was something we had rehearsed in the simulator. There's also a really lovely and powerful story of one of our C-130 crews that was actually in and amongst the melee at the time, and you'll know that the 4 fans of freedom can present quite a hazardous series of objects for people that choose to surround a plane. But the way the captain dealt with that situation. They didn't turn their engines off. They just did a really good job of navigating their way through the folks using sound and being quite directive from the plane. Kind of gave a bit of a corollary to our natural inclination. So our first inclination was, well, it'd be better to send C-17s into that environment because they don't have these big props on them. But then when you hear and learn of the narrative from the C-130, you thought, well, actually, because there is this obvious and physical threat and the way that you can adjust and make noise with the blades, you're able to actually deter people. So the answer to that situation isn't as obvious as one might first consider, but the lesson for me to take from that is there is no substitute from having command on the ground able to make that decision. Now, be that the aircraft commander at the time, the force protection people that were on board the aircraft, so the RAF regiment guys and the RAF police guys, or the folks that are forward that are going to be protecting you when you're on the ground, to be able to feed those that decision and understanding at that exact moment, to allow a commander, to someone that understands what is happening to their people, to say yes or no. And I was probably quite, because of what I knew personally and what I was being told real time, I think we made the right decisions. So that plane got out safely, and it's a lovely story if ever you get to read it fully. But we also elected to send the Atlas around and ultimately brought it home. So that particular moment of emergency situation raises a lot of really useful lessons. The biggest one being, as I said, the importance of leadership at the coalface.
I'm going to trying to merge three questions which are sort of getting after a similar thing. One of them is from John Britton, who's asking, at the 16 Air Assault Brigade briefing about a month and a half ago, RUSI, they mentioned that there were communication problems at various points on the ground. And so he's asking whether the communications worked well between the ground and the air side of things in your experiences. There's also a question from John Heron about whether the RAF regiment would have made some of those things better in terms of communications potentially around cordons. And a question from Stephen Price on operational security about the cordons and how things worked with the partner arms of regiments that were providing security on the ground.
So I think Kate kind of pointed to earlier the joined up nature of the team. In fact, so I'll break the question up. So the first one's communication. Communication is always a challenge and problem, regardless of what we do. That will always be a #1 lesson from anything. And what I would say in that regard, and I'll probably get sage nods left and right, emails don't work. If you think you are commanding by sending emails, you're not in command, because they quite simply doesn't work. Leave that behind, that with the paper and runners, that isn't the case. So we were receiving something in the order of 500 emails per day. And so the method of communication is important. And that's why the folks on the ground from 16 said that the best communications were interpersonal communications, chatting on the phone. And that's how you guys worked back with home.
Yeah, definitely. We found, purely because we didn't have access to emails and things like that, we couldn't communicate in that means. So speaking to people, seeing people, we had an ALO in Kabul, absolutely, undoubtedly was such a benefit for us, because we could talk to him every time we did a flight, get the situation, get an understanding of the amount of passengers or potential patients that we would have. So yeah, that comms bit there's always going to be room for improvement. But I think we started to learn from that even throughout the operation, and really built on how we could get the information through so that we were kind of in the know once we landed and were returning.
For me, So we needed a lot more blankets because we had a load of children and we only had half the amount of blankets. So when I got back, I got told to send an email. I said, no, I'm not sending an email because emails to me sometimes don't get answered or they don't look at in time. We wanted that now. So I just, I got the phone number and I phoned 3 times till I got through. And then finally I found out that blankets were getting on the jet then, enough blankets. So yes.
And a similar thing happened with suites. We were talking about suites earlier, how we, the interactions on the ground, I'll come to the security point, but the interactions on the ground allowed us to realise that people were arriving at the gate exhausted, and you were saying about exhaustion. And
it was
so we were able to draw suites out of the UK very quickly. It's a seemingly small thing, but it meant that you had lots of hyperactive
yes. Yeah, exactly. The children running around all over. And it was like, oh.
So I think the lesson there is you have to, the immediacy, the temptation nowadays is to hide behind emails, but the immediacy of action has to be coupled with getting on the phone, and that meant that we were able to talk mostly by SATCOM to the forces forward, get an appreciation of what was going on the ground, how things were facing them, and that was particular around the moment the IED happened or the collapse of the airfield, for the commanders to make real-time decisions and assessments then, and then to be able to move forward. Now, what that should be coupled with, and was to a greater extent, is very clear deliverances of orders in sort of missives, and that's a very old-fashioned way of working. Give me a set of orders with intent, and then allow me to adjust and manage what's happening at the moment using sort of more active, more communications, interpersonal communications. And so that narrative was true with our force protection forces, and bringing the RAF regiment guys out on the aircraft for them to be able to do the security in and around the planes was a very appropriate use of them and their expertise. So I took great pleasure in knowing that we had sharpshooters in and around the plane that were able to deal and provide very specific capabilities to the aircraft in the situation that was exposed to us. And those folks were brilliant at being able to interact with the folks that were on the ground. And talk in the language that's common to them both, because much though I pretend to be a soldier on occasion, I'm not, and so I allow that communication to happen through our soldiers, and they did that brilliantly well, and that allowed us to veer and haul on those levers when they're presented to us.
We've got another one specifically for you, Wing Commander Bailey, from Larry Clark, who I happen to know is in the rotary side of things in the RAF, but he's asking, you point out that there exists a friction between routine tasking on one hand and readiness and preparedness on the other. His specific question is what training opportunities exist in the UK for the air mobility fleet and its relative enablers, and whether there's enough kind of fat in the system to allow these to be properly exploited. Or does routine tasking, because it's so essential, what you do for the rest of defence, more often kind of take priority? And if that's the case, does there need to be a sort of shift in force culture within the air mobility fleet to kind of be able to make better use of robust training for kind of getting that higher readiness for various mission sets?
So there was a very aggressive nod of the head next to me here, because as Kate mentioned right at the beginning, the capability, the force elements aren't just the planes and aircrew. It's quite important that we go and act as an organisation, act as a force element. I got in quite a bit of, I think it was Twitter trouble, that is, when I took a photo of about 12 people, and that was all the people on the plane that I referred to as the aircrew. Now there's financial implications for doing that, but the point was that was the force element. Those medics, the RAF regiment guys, the police officers, etc., were the force element. And so it's important that Defence recognises that the entire enterprise needs to be exercised, and which is why I think Hayley was nodding, and we'll come on to that shortly. The use of our reserve forces and our auxiliary forces is fundamental to be able to deliver some of the capabilities that we did on pitting, and therefore you have to pick moments in time to be able to draw those forces together and exercise them together. I think there is a necessary tension, and Defence has to make choices about the activities that it does and what that means, and what I and my muckers sat either side of us need is other parts of the defence enterprise to advocate on us on our behalf for doing that, because it's not us that makes the demands, reasonable demands for support to routine defence activity. We need other parts of the organisation to recognise when it's appropriate to use military AT or to use commercial AT, and the implications, should it be military AT, what the implications of doing so are, because what I would offer is that the implication of doing so is that we drive risk into operations because we aren't as well prepared for the operations as we could be, and that's where I think your nodding came from. That not that we weren't prepared, but that we need to test all parts of the system, and particularly our reserve.
Yeah, definitely. With the reserve, I mean, that's why reserves are so important, because when, I mean, I knew that the squadron was very, very busy with other taskings all around the world. When our pitting came, they had to get everyone in, you know, and we got the phone call, would you help out? And I was in the middle of because my other job is a wedding planner, event planner. So I was in the middle of a lot of events, and I had to ask people to help me out with other events while I went on the plane to Upton, really, because I knew they needed us. So reservists is a big thing at the minute, to be a big part of all this, really. But we bring a lot to the squadron, really, because of where we've been and what we've done in past exercises, past wars. You know, I've done Iraq War and Afghanistan War. You know, we've been in and out. So my strength is the fact that I'm experienced with a lot of things that we see.
But to be able to do that, like I said, the thing to take away is we need other parts of the enterprise to advocate, because if they don't, they're denying defence the choice, and therefore that's driving risk into future operations that they may be on the receiving end of.
Brilliant. So we've got two slightly linked questions, which hopefully will also follow on from what we were just talking about, particularly with regards to reserves and other taskings. This is one on readiness levels of the force near the start, on how closely did the air mobility fleet, or indeed within those fleets, manage to meet the various readiness levels R1, R2, R3, etc., that they're typically held at. And was there a lesson, for example, that the RAF was actually able to deploy much faster than the kind of stated readiness would suggest for various force elements? And also a related question from Martin McDowell, who's asking, given the high volume of flights and the pretty extreme conditions at the Kabul end, was there kind of major support required at that end from third-party suppliers or commercial partners, or was that done at the kind of Ali Hadid or Bry's end of things?
So I'll start and try and draw some of those parts out. So the first thing to recognise is that, I'll go backwards on the question. Why use military AT ultimately is that question. The reason why we use military air transport is that it is independent of a need to have infrastructure at the other end. So do we need commercial partners? Absolutely not. We should be able to combat offload, onload, operate when airfield assurance becomes less than it would be for commercial operations. And so that is why you see military aircraft in that way, utilised in that way, and the enterprise kind of used in that way. Moving back from there, I think, could you, could you just ask the middle part of the second?
So it was around what the different parts of the, so A, was there kind of support from the industrial contracting side of things in terms of, you know, manufacturing supplies?
So moving back from there, sorry, of course we won't talk specifically about what readiness we are on, and that would stray above the classification of this discussion. But we spoke about the balance of routine and readiness, and I'll perhaps hand over to Kate in a mo. But routine allows you to maintain a certain amount of capability and readiness, and it's the jump from there to the exquisite, and how quickly we were able to do that. And I think, as Kate pointed to earlier, when we were able to draw or significantly increase the size of our force, you can see that perhaps the old readiness models aren't necessarily pertinent for 2022 going forwards, because just taking a high efficiency kind of airline model means that you're and the challenge between that and a readiness model that has you kind of sat in garrison or back at the aerodrome in stocks waiting to go, means that you are good and proficient at different things. It's the organization's ability to turn its hand to the latter is where you hold risk. And so I think that the important parts of the element, which Kate will talk to, is where we perhaps challenge some of those previous conceptions.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say using our AT, absolutely, yeah, you know, we needed that. It meant that we've got nurses, medics, police, all trained around those aircrafts, so we could operate within those environments very independently, and it's what we're trained for. As a point of readiness, particularly our squadron, we are high readiness all the time to do different flights and different maneuvers. But what it did show is that getting people from outside agencies, and you know, we uplifted some nurses from the hospitals, military nurses, to help with the squadron, and that was because the day-to-day and the routine jobs that we've discussed, that does still happen in the background. And actually, I think what it did show is that, yeah, we are ready to go out of the door and do tasks that are necessary, but it's utilising kind of some extra help along the way to ensure that those routine tasks carry on as normal as well.
I think we spoke quite a bit about drawing in the reserve forces a minute ago, but I suppose the activation model for you guys, how easy was that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're on, there's about sort of 6 of us reservists on the 62 squadron as cabin crew, and I've got a job. Some of the others haven't got work because they've got a nice big pension to fall back on. So so they were there ready. Do you know what I mean? So we always get the phone call. You know, are you there? Can you come and work? We always give a plot, like around my events and functions. I say I can work then, but the outpitting was very different. You know, I made the effort to give my event company to someone else to run as I was doing outpitting.
Thanks. Got a couple of questions which I think work to group together, aware of time. So the first one was from James McLennan on you know, looking at your experiences in the sort of Kabul side of outpitting specifically. If you were to transpose that to a future operation, a future NEO, for example, what additional difficulties would you think you would face if you were conducting a similar evacuation from a new area of operations where there wasn't a prior military presence and there wasn't that kind of knowledge? And sort of slightly linked, which you may or may not feel you could comment on, but from Ian Williamson, you know, what difference to pitting do you feel might have been made if, say, Bagram, for example, had remained open and there'd been a sort of second, more remote operating location?
Okay, so transpose this operation and additional difficulties. I'll set that perhaps for the guy sat either side of me. I think the biggest blight in a way is the temptation to do pitting again. So I don't know whether what do you feel about that, because there's always this temptation that, well, pitting worked, right, this problem looks like pitting, let's make it pitting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we take away from it. I mean, I think one of the major things for us was more medics on our flights, you know, from Minad to UK, because we are trained, but there was a lot of elements, there was a lot of medical issues, but I felt that we need more medics on board, really. But I have said that back, and it will happen the next time something this happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we know that we can do it, and there would be definite things that we would learn from it. And it's, you know, it's a humanitarian kind of relief, I'd say. So whether or not, you know, we should do it again, I mean, I think there's elements that we would just take away from it, you know, different teams, different equipment, and, you know, getting down to the real kind of tactical levels of things. There'd be definite ways that we could improve things in the future.
So I think at the beginning I signposted the underwriting of some of the operational risk through the experiences learned on Op Catalo. And the environment was very similar, but I think the risk when we go anywhere else is that we don't recognise the things that were put in place prior to this experience that wouldn't necessarily be there were we to go somewhere else. And that's kind of the importance of operational risk management. So when we know something like this is going to happen again, someone needs to say, have all your crews gone in the sim and exercised through an escalating series of emergencies that reduce the amount of risk, that reduce the amount of assurance that you have at an airfield. And we kind of must recognize that happened, that we just didn't, someone said at one point that we're making the decisions on this, and I said, well, we're underwriting them, but we had underwritten them before we got to the operation, because we were able to say, well, just how far we could go on certain things. And that was also, some of that experience was prior experience through working very closely with our NATO colleagues to understand how, in particular, we could increase the volumetrics on C-17 and A400 very quickly and safely. So there is a danger that we don't recognise what we didn't explicitly do prior to pitting, if that were to make sense. The discussion about Bagram is a longer, probably separate one. I think it's Bagram would have changed so many things about the environment that it's in a way it's kind of not relevant to pitting, because one might argue that that we wouldn't, proximity to people trying to be removed from the environment, the actual political situation that would have been there. Bagram's a much deeper and wider discussion, and really is one that kind of talks to political issues that are well out of our sphere. But were we to have used Bagram, I don't think necessarily it would have changed our experience.
And with 1 minute left, I'll give you a final word on two questions that are basically lessons learned. So David Wardrop asks, with so many nations involved, are you aware of any initiatives to review and share lessons learned within that wider community through either NATO or the EU or wherever? And one from my boss, with the DCP highlighting persistent engagement, are there specific lessons you take from op pitting for the RAF's air transport fleet and the enabling capabilities in that particular vein? So kind of final thoughts, I guess.
Okay, I'll very quickly go. So maybe not as aware of as many initiatives as we would have been, except for our commanders are very keen that we go to our partner nations, be they France, Germany, the US, Canada, and on, of course, the multiplicity of nations that we work with in NATO. And they are very keen for us to get out and go and see what those experiences were like, because we did things differently. We could see and observe and feel it, and we need to capture that and share that. And we'll only do that by going to visit each other on overseas, perhaps. And in terms of the lessons, I think we've brought most of them out here. I think I'd leave with maybe 3 questions, just the discussion on readiness, on the applicability of technology, and the importance of people and leadership at all levels of the organisation.
Thanks very much, guys. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but still questions coming in, but I'm sure we'll have a chance to chat another time. Thank you very much for the free and frank discussions. Have a great day, everyone.